Okay, Iran's supreme leader is dead. We're 9 days into this war, and I've been getting a lot of messages. People sending me this interview, this podcast, asking what I think. There's a professor on there who made 3 predictions 2 years ago on camera. Trump wins. America goes to war with Iran. America loses. The first 2 came true. So now everyone wants to know, is the third one coming true too? I watched the whole thing. And look, parts of it I agree with. Parts of it are genuinely sharp analysis. I'm going to tell you which parts. But there's a moment in that interview, one specific moment, where I had to stop, rewind, watch it again, because I thought I'd misheard. This is what I want to talk about today. What's actually happening in this war, where I think the analysis holds up, where it doesn't, and that moment. Because if you watched that interview and walked away thinking you understood the full picture, I don't think you do, and I want to fix that. 3 things I'm going to cover, quick. First, what I think that interview got right. I'm not going to dismiss everything just because I disagree with the conclusion. That's not honest analysis. Second, what I actually see when I look at the evidence on the ground right now. And there's one framing of this war that I think almost everyone is getting wrong, including that interview. I'll get to it. Third, that moment. The exact sentence where a serious geopolitical conversation became something else entirely, and what it means for how you should watch any analysis of this conflict going forward. If you felt something was off watching that interview, but couldn't put your finger on it, stay with me. That feeling has a name. So, the predictions first. Trump winning in November 2024. Look, in hindsight, that looks obvious. But the war call? In 2024, my colleagues, serious people, were still saying both sides would step back from the brink, that the proxy conflict would stay contained. I wasn't so sure myself. And then February 28th, 2026, joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. Khamenei killed in the opening hours. The man who'd governed that country since 1989, gone on day 1. Getting that call right on camera 2 years before it happened, that's not nothing. I want to be clear about that. The economic infrastructure argument I also think holds up. The idea that Iran would target critical Gulf infrastructure, data centers, energy, ports, rather than going toe-to-toe militarily. That's exactly what we've seen. Amazon's facility in Bahrain hit. 2 data centers in the UAE directly struck, still offline as I'm recording this. Iranian missiles in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait City, and the interceptor cost asymmetry. I've been making this argument myself for 2 years. Cheap Iranian drones, $50,000, being chased by interceptor missiles that cost $1 million or more. That math is not sustainable. It's a real problem, and it was correctly identified. So I want to be straight with you. Some of what was said in that interview reflects genuine understanding of how this conflict was going to unfold. I'm not here to dismiss it wholesale. But here's where my analysis parts ways. And it parts ways significantly because I watched that same interview and saw something that I think changes the meaning of everything before it. And I need to build to it properly. So stay with me. The central claim in that interview is that Iran has the strategic advantage, that this is a war of attrition. Iran is positioned to win. I don't think that holds up when you look at what Iran actually brought into this war after the 12-day conflict last June, and I think people are underestimating how significant that was. Roughly 2/3 of Iran's ballistic missile launchers had already been destroyed, between 1/3 and 1/2 of the entire arsenal gone before February 28th. Air defenses significantly degraded, and then the economy collapsed on top of that. Late December 2025, protests erupt, the biggest since the revolution itself in 1979. The regime responded by killing somewhere between 30 and 40,000 of its own citizens to stop them. That is not, and I want to be careful how I say this, that is not the picture of a country that has been quietly preparing for 20 years and is ready to grind down the American military in a war of attrition. That's a country that was already on the back foot before the first strike landed. Now, the proxy network argument, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the Iraqi militias, this whole forward defense architecture. I've studied Iranian strategic doctrine for a long time, and yes, this network was formidable. The key word is was. Hamas, significantly degraded. Hezbollah, significantly degraded. Their chief of staff killed, arsenal reduced, and Lebanon's own government, not Israel's, has now moved to ban Hezbollah's military operations entirely and demanded they hand over their weapons. The Houthis condemned the strikes on Iran, and the Strait of Hormuz has now effectively shut. I'll come back to that. But a coordinated multi-front proxy campaign of the kind described in that interview, the evidence doesn't support it. What I see when I look at the actual military picture is something more specific. Iran is not capable of the sustained campaign being described. What it's doing is episodic, calibrated. It escalates in bursts specifically because it knows that going further risks a response that ends the regime entirely. And this is the thing I don't think is being said clearly enough anywhere right now. So let me say it directly. Iran is not attacking the Gulf states because it thinks it can win. Iran is attacking the Gulf states because it's trying to survive. Those are completely different things, and they lead to completely different predictions about what happens next. A country attacking from strength behaves one way. A country attacking because stopping means collapse behaves another way entirely. What I'm watching, the drone strikes, the data center hits, the missile barrages, that's not a winning strategy unfolding. That's a regime that lost its supreme leader on day one, that entered this war already missing a third of its missile capacity, that has the largest domestic opposition movement in 45 years at its back, desperately trying to make the cost of continuing too high for Washington. Once you see it that way, the whole picture shifts. On the petrodollar argument, there's something real here, and I want to acknowledge it. The Strait of Hormuz is not theoretical. 20% of global oil moves through there, and as of today, it has effectively shut. Brent crude surged past $110 this morning, up over 20% in a single session. That is a serious economic shock. I'm not dismissing it, but there's a difference, and it's an important one, between a serious oil shock and the complete collapse of the dollar-based reserve currency system. One is happening right now. The other is a conclusion that requires a mechanism, a chain of causation that I have not seen anyone lay out coherently, including in that interview. When someone gives you the conclusion without the mechanism, that's the moment to slow down. Okay, this is what I've been building toward. In that interview, the host asks a genuinely important question. Why did Trump do this at all? His own military brass were warning against it. The interceptor math was public. The risks were known. What was the actual calculus? And honestly, the first two answers given are ones I can engage with seriously. Hubris. Early foreign policy wins. The El Salvador operation. A few. Quick diplomatic wins. Created overconfidence. The historical parallel to Hitler invading the Soviet Union after sweeping through Europe is a legitimate analytical frame. I've used similar comparisons myself. Hubris as a driver of strategic catastrophe is one of the most well-documented patterns in the history of warfare. Personal financial incentives. The argument that Trump's decision-making is shaped by his financial relationships with Saudi and Israeli-aligned interests. You can agree or disagree with the specific claims, but it's grounded in named people, documented transactions, verifiable timelines. It can be argued about. That's what serious analysis looks like. I take both of those seriously. Even where I'd push back on specifics, they're the kind of explanations that survive contact with evidence. And then comes the third explanation. The world is governed by secret societies. The Illuminati, three groups specifically, the Jesuits, who control the Vatican, the Sabbatean Frankists, who control modern Israel, the Freemasons, who control the U.S. national security apparatus. The Epstein files are cited as evidence, and the conclusion is that these groups are running this war as part of an eschatological script, end times, heaven on earth. The host responds, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I think the paraphrase is actually more revealing than the quote. The host says, "Wow, very informative," and moves to the next question. That's it. No pause, no flagging. The conversation just continues. Now, I want to be precise about something. I'm not interested in whether those beliefs are sincere. I'm interested in something more specific, which is the analytical category of what just happened in that interview. The first two explanations, I can test them. I can find evidence that supports or undermines them. Someone can push back with counter evidence and we can have a real argument. That's how analysis works. That's what makes it useful. The third explanation cannot be tested. A secret society that operates across centuries, controls every government, leaves no verifiable trace. There is no evidence you could produce that would disprove it. Any counter evidence just becomes proof of the cover-up. Any inconvenient fact gets absorbed into the framework. A theory that cannot be disproved is not a theory, it's a closed loop. What I find genuinely troubling, and I've thought about this a lot since I watched that interview, is not that the claim was made. People make all kinds of claims. What troubles me is that it was delivered in the same tone, the same register, right after two legitimate analytical frameworks. And nothing in that conversation marked the difference. The host didn't pause. The interview didn't change. It just continued as if all three explanations were the same kind of thing. They are not the same kind of thing, not even close. This is the pattern I want you to be able to recognize, not just in this interview, in anything you watch about this war, or any complex event. When someone shifts from verifiable claims to unfalsifiable ones without telling you they've shifted, that's the moment that matters. That's when you need to notice. Because if you can't tell the difference, you can't evaluate anything. So let me tell you what I'm actually focused on. The questions I think matter, and that didn't get asked. First, can you achieve regime change through air power alone? My read of history says no. Every forced regime change I've studied has required either boots on the ground or the government collapsing from within. The stated objective here is regime change. Rubio is saying the hardest strikes are still coming. Trump is talking about unconditional surrender, but nobody has defined what Iran looks like the morning after. Who governs? How you prevent it from fragmenting into something worse than what's there now. In my experience, that gap between military objective and political endgame is historically where these things go wrong. Second, what's actually happening inside Iran? This is the variable I watch most carefully. The protests in late 2025 were unlike anything since 1979. The regime killed tens of thousands of its own people to suppress them. That tells you something about how fragile it knows itself to be. Now, do external strikes accelerate that collapse from within? Or do they hand the regime a nationalist narrative that lets them consolidate? I've seen both outcomes play out historically, and I'm genuinely not certain which way this goes. Anyone who is certain is not being straight with you. Third, and this one got almost no time in that interview, which I find remarkable. What does China do? China has a 25-year cooperation agreement with Iran. It takes the vast majority of Iran's oil. How Beijing responds, whether it keeps trading, whether it provides material or diplomatic support, whether it uses this moment as leverage against Washington, shapes this conflict in ways that no amount of American air power can simply override. And it was essentially ignored. In an interview that went nearly an hour, these are the things I'm tracking. I'll keep coming back to them as this develops. Look, I don't know how this ends. I want to be straight about that. Not as a disclaimer, not to protect myself. I genuinely don't know. It's 10 days old, it's moving fast, and the variables are real and serious. The third prediction, that the U.S. loses this war, might still come true. I've studied enough history to know that military superiority doesn't guarantee anything. The question that actually matters isn't who has better weapons. It's who has a clearer picture of what they're trying to achieve and a viable path to getting there. Right now, I'm not sure either side does. What I do think, and this I'll stand behind, is that the tools for evaluating what's happening are available to anyone willing to use them. Ask yourself what evidence would change a given analyst's mind. Ask whether the claims being made could, in principle, be disproved. If the answer to both of those is nothing, then what you're watching might be compelling. It might even turn out to contain things that are true, but it is not analysis. That discomfort you felt watching that interview, that slight sense that something had shifted without you being told, trust it. Your instincts were right. Well, I'll be back when there's something worth saying. Take care of yourselves.